One of the clearest signs that your life has become a trap is not that you want to escape. It is that you have become very good at explaining why you must stay. You know the reasons. The job is stable. The timing is wrong. People depend on you. You have already come this far. It would be irresponsible to question everything now. And the strange thing is, none of those reasons are completely false. That is what makes them so powerful. A lie is easier to reject. A half-truth is more dangerous because it gives you just enough evidence to stop questioning yourself. So you keep defending a life that some part of you no longer fully wants. You explain it to other people. You explain it to yourself. You call it maturity. You call it loyalty. You call it being realistic. But underneath all those explanations, there is a sentence you do not want to hear. Maybe I am not trapped because I have no choice. Maybe I am trapped because every honest choice has a price. And by trap, I do not mean a life with no exit. I mean a life where every exit feels morally forbidden. Leaving feels selfish. Changing feels irresponsible. Questioning it feels ungrateful. So you stay, not only because of the situation, but because every serious change starts to feel like proof that you are doing something wrong. That is a difficult thought to let in, because the trap is not only the job, the relationship, or the responsibility. It is also the way you have learned to defend them before you tell yourself the truth. Most people imagine a trapped life as something obviously wrong. A terrible job, a broken relationship, a family that controls everything, a path someone else forced them into. But some lives are harder to question because they are not obviously wrong. They are reasonable. They are explainable. They are built out of decisions that once made sense. If someone asked why you stay, you could answer quickly. The work pays well enough. The relationship has history. Your family needs you. The routine keeps life stable. Changing now would create too much disruption. This is what makes the trap so difficult. It is not made of obvious lies. It is made of reasons that are true enough to keep you from asking a deeper question. Those reasons may be real. This is not about pretending your situation is simple, but a life can be easy to explain to other people and still feel wrong when you are the one who has to live it. A path can protect you for a while, then quietly begin to drain you. A choice can make sense at one stage of life and still stop fitting the person you are now. That is where the guilt comes in. You do not only feel stuck, you feel guilty for feeling stuck. You think, other people would be grateful for this. I am probably being dramatic. I chose this. I should stop questioning so much. So instead of listening to the feeling, you start defending against it. You do not ask, what is this trying to tell me? You ask, how can I prove this feeling is unreasonable? That is often the first sign that something is wrong. Not just the feeling itself, but how quickly you start explaining why you should not feel it. A trap like this usually begins with a choice that solved a problem. Maybe you chose the option that made everyone stop worrying about you. Maybe you became the reliable one because people praised you more when you had no needs of your own. Maybe you chose the career that was easiest to explain, not the one you actually wanted. Maybe you stayed because leaving would have hurt people you still cared about. At the time, the choice may have been honest, or necessary, or simply the best your younger self could do with the fear and information available then. That matters. This video is not here to insult the old version of you. That person may have been trying very hard to survive. But a choice does not stay flexible forever. At first, it is just something you do. Then people begin to expect it. Then you begin to expect it from yourself. And eventually, not doing it feels like becoming a bad person. That is when the role becomes a trap. Not when you perform it, but when stepping outside of it makes you feel selfish, irresponsible, or disloyal. You become the person who answers quickly, stays calm, makes the practical choice, and rarely gives people a reason to worry. At first, that role helps people understand where you fit. Later, it starts deciding what you are allowed to say, want, question, and refuse. You stop asking, "Is this still right for me?" and start asking, "How do I keep this from upsetting anyone?" You stop thinking of your life as something you are choosing. You begin to treat it as something you are not allowed to disturb. That is how a life you once chose can start to feel like a set of rules you are no longer allowed to question. French existentialist philosopher Jean-Paul Sartre is useful here because he understood something uncomfortable about human beings. Sometimes, we do not hide from freedom because we have none. We hide from freedom because once we admit we still have a choice, we can no longer pretend the situation is deciding everything for us. Sartre called one form of this self-deception bad faith. Bad faith is not simply telling yourself a lie. It is what happens when you take one real part of your life and treat it as if it explains your whole existence. This does not mean your situation is imaginary. The job may really matter. Your family may really need you. Your past choices may really have consequences. Some limits may really be there. But according to Sartre, the mistake begins when you act as if those facts have already decided everything for you. In one of his famous examples, Sartre describes a waiter who performs his role almost too perfectly. Every gesture, every movement, every word seems to say, "This is what I am. I am a waiter. Nothing more." The point is not that the waiter is fake. He really is doing the job. The problem is that he acts as if the role has swallowed the whole person, as if there is no distance between him and the part he is playing. That is where this connects to your life. You may not say, "I am only a waiter," but you may say, "I am only the responsible one. I am only the practical one. I am only the person who chose this path. I am only the person my family depends on. I am only the version of myself that does not surprise anyone." In everyday life, bad faith often sounds very ordinary. I cannot change. It is too late. I have responsibilities. I already chose this. This is just my life now. I have no choice. Some of those sentences may be partly true. That is why they are so convincing. But bad faith often begins when a partial truth becomes the whole explanation. Yes, you may have responsibilities. Yes, your past choices matter. Yes, changing may create consequences. But those facts do not automatically mean the rest of your life has already been decided. The sentence, "I have no choice," can feel strangely comforting. If you have no choice, then you do not have to decide. You do not have to disappoint anyone. You do not have to risk being misunderstood. You do not have to admit what you want. You do not have to face the possibility that another life may exist, but that it would ask something painful from you. Sometimes "I have no choice" means exactly what it says, but sometimes it means "I do not want to face the cost of choosing differently." That is not an easy sentence to admit. It does not make your life simple. It does not erase money, duty, history, family, or fear. It simply asks whether the explanation you keep using is still true, or whether it has become a way to avoid admitting that staying is also costing you something. This is where the conversation has to stay honest. Real limits exist. Money, health, children, family obligations, culture, and survival do not disappear just because a sentence about freedom sounds good. Freedom is not a fantasy where consequences disappear, and it is not a way to blame yourself for every difficult situation. But fear rarely announces itself as fear. It borrows better language. It sounds mature. It sounds practical. It sounds loyal. It sounds like being a good person. It says, "Be realistic. Do not create problems. Do not disappoint them. You already made your choice. This is not the time. You are not the kind of person who does that." And because those sentences sound reasonable, you may never notice that these reasons do not help you decide. They help you avoid deciding. That is another form of the trap. Not a locked door, a set of reasons that make every door feel wrong. You can usually feel the difference before you can explain it. You say, "It is fine," too quickly, because if you pause for 1 second longer, something more honest might come out. You open a job listing, see the salary, the requirements, the city, and close it before you let yourself imagine a different life too clearly. You imagine saying one honest sentence, then immediately hear the argument they might use against you. You feel irritated when people praise you for being dependable, because they are praising the exact role that is exhausting you. None of these moments prove you must leave, but they do prove that some part of you is asking to be taken seriously. Most people are trained to count the cost of changing. If you change, someone may be hurt. You may lose stability. You may lose approval. You may have to start again. You may have to explain yourself. You may have to admit you were unhappy for longer than you wanted to know. Those costs are real. But staying also has a cost. It is simply easier to disguise. The trap keeps working when you count only the cost of leaving and ignore the cost of staying. The cost of staying is harder to notice because it does not always feel like suffering. Sometimes it feels like becoming easier to manage. You learn to need less, ask for less, react less, and call that maturity. The cost of staying often looks respectable. It looks like patience. It looks like loyalty. It looks like being practical. It looks like strength. But over time, you pay in smaller ways. You stop saying certain things. You stop wanting certain things out loud. You become efficient at ignoring your own reactions. You say, "Yeah, it's fine," before anyone has time to ask a second question. You keep the life running. And because nothing collapses, you tell yourself nothing is wrong. But inside, you keep doing the tasks, answering the messages, keeping the peace, and showing up on time, while some honest part of you is no longer really there. That is the hidden cost. Not misery every day, not constant pain. Something quieter. A slow distance from yourself. You keep showing up, but you no longer believe half the things you say to keep everything normal. One day, you may realize you are not angry because your life is terrible. You are angry because you have spent years defending a life that keeps asking you to pretend. It can show up at work. The strange part is that you are not failing. You are improving. People trust you more. They give you more responsibility. You become very competent at a life you would not choose again. That almost makes it worse, because every sign of progress becomes another reason to stay on a path you are less and less sure you want. The promotion, the praise, the stable paycheck, the proof that the choice worked. When you imagine 5 more years, there is no dramatic panic, just a kind of silence, as if some part of you has stopped arguing because it already knows you will talk yourself out of listening. It can show up in a relationship, not a cruel one, not one that gives you a clean reason to leave, just one where the routines, history, shared plans, and familiar explanations have become very easy to defend. You do not only stay because of love. You stay because leaving would force you to become the person who disrupted a life that everyone else thought was fine. The sentence that traps you is not always, "I am happy." Sometimes it is not bad enough to leave. But does something have to destroy you before you are allowed to tell the truth? It can show up in your family. You are the one who can be counted on, the one who understands, the one who does not make things harder. Because that role once gave you love, questioning it can feel cruel. But sometimes the identity that made you valuable also makes you unavailable to yourself. You are not always afraid they will stop loving you completely. You are afraid they will no longer know what to do with you. You say, "I have to." What you mean is, "I do not know who I would be if I stopped being useful in this way." And sometimes the trap belongs to a choice you made years ago. A degree, a city, a career, a promise, a version of success. At the time, it made sense. Maybe it was the safest thing available. Maybe it was the only path people around you understood. Maybe it felt like direction because it reduced the fear you did not know how to handle. That does not make the choice wrong. It means you made that choice with the fear, pressure, and information you had at the time. But a choice your younger self made does not get to decide the rest of your life. The question is not, "Was I wrong then?" The question is, "Am I still telling the truth now?" When people hear the word freedom, they often imagine escape. Quit everything, leave everyone, start over, become someone new. Sometimes change really is necessary. Sometimes a person does need to leave. Sometimes staying in the role would mean continuing to pretend. But escape can also become another way to avoid responsibility. You can leave the job, the city, or the relationship, and still keep using the same old sentences to avoid telling yourself the truth. Freedom is not chaos. It is not impulse. It is not doing whatever you want and pretending consequences do not exist. Freedom begins before the dramatic decision. It begins when you stop lying about where you are already choosing. You may stay. You may keep the job for now. You may remain in the relationship for now. You may continue carrying responsibilities. But something changes when you stop calling every fear a duty. Instead of saying, "I have no choice," you begin to say, "There are choices here, and all of them cost something." That sentence is heavier, but it is also more honest. You do not have to destroy your life to stop lying inside it. The first act of freedom is not always leaving. Sometimes it is much smaller than that. It is admitting the sentence you've been using to close the door. I have to. I cannot. It is too late. This is just who I am. This is just how life is. Do not rush to fix these sentences. Translate them first. Because very often, the sentence on the surface is not the whole truth underneath. I have to may mean I am afraid not to. I cannot may mean I do not want to face the consequence. It is too late may mean I do not want to grieve the years I already gave. This is who I am may mean this is the role I know how to survive inside. The point is not to judge yourself. The point is to stop disappearing behind sentences that no longer tell the whole truth. Then comes the harder part. You separate the fact from the fear. A fact may be, I need money. A fear may be, if I change anything, I will lose all stability. A fact may be, people depend on me. A fear may be, if I disappoint them, I am selfish. This is where the trap becomes clearer. The trap is not always the fact itself. The trap is when fear attaches itself to a fact and calls itself the whole truth. So the question is not only, what is the cost of changing? The question is also, what is the cost of staying exactly as I am? Because staying has a price too. Every time you say yes when something in you knows the answer is no, every time you call fear responsibility because responsibility sounds more respectable, every time you keep the peace by becoming less honest, every time you protect a life that keeps asking you not to fully show up. This does not mean you must make one dramatic decision today. You may not need to quit. You may not need to leave. You may not need to destroy the structure of your life. But you may need to stop lying inside it. That can begin with one honest sentence. Not a perfect plan, not a final answer. One honest sentence. I do not know if I want this anymore. I am more afraid than I have admitted. I am staying, but staying is changing me. I am not ready to change everything, but I am ready to stop pretending this is nothing. That is not weakness. That is the beginning of responsibility. Not the kind of responsibility that keeps you trapped, the kind that brings you back into your own life. Maybe your life is not a trap because there is no door. Maybe it feels like a trap because every door asks something from you. One door asks for uncertainty. One asks for disappointment. One asks for grief. One asks for honesty. One asks you to become someone people may not immediately understand. And one asks you to stay, but to stop pretending staying is free. This is why freedom is difficult. It does not remove consequences. It reveals them. You may not need to change everything today, but you do need to stop calling every consequence impossible. Maybe you are not trapped because there is no way out. Maybe you are trapped because every way out asks you to disappoint a version of yourself, the life people have built around you, or the version of you that others still need. And maybe freedom begins quietly. Not when you finally know exactly what to do, but when you stop saying, "I have no choice," before you have even told yourself the truth. So the final question is not, can I escape my life? The deeper question is, what truth am I avoiding because admitting it would force me to change?